Rachel Duchamp. Welcome to Free Exchange, hosted by the Hammond Institute for Free Enterprise at Lindenwood University. The Hammond Institute fosters free enterprise and civil and religious liberty through the examination of market-oriented approaches to economic and social issues. One of the centers underneath the Hammond Institute is the Liberty and Ethics Center. I direct that one, and I have some fellows who are academics from around the country that are interested in some of these topics and are willing to speak and publish for the center. One of those is Dr. Greg Beabout, who I have with me today from St. Louis University. So you're close, you're local. You have so many different interests, we could waste the whole show talking about them all, but I see in your bio Catholic social thought, Kierkegaard, existentialism, business. Tell us a little bit about it all.
As you say, I've got wide interests. My training's in the history of philosophy and also in theology, but I've had long-standing interest in the intersection between ethics and economics, between moral concerns and market concerns.
Okay, so that sort of informs the rest of your work?
Yeah, so I try to bring insights from the history of philosophy and especially from personalism. I've had a long-standing interest in the movement of personalism, contemporary personalism, concern for the dignity of the human person, to issues of the market, the business sector.
Okay, wonderful. And you have written a book. It's coming out. You've written many books, but you have a new one coming out, The Character of the Manager. And this is coming out this coming year?
It's out a week ago.
It's out, okay. It is now out, wonderful. From office executive to wise steward. So why don't we talk about that project today?
Sure.
Mm-hmm. I know that you work on the philosophy of Alistair MacIntyre. Now, just quickly before we get into the book itself, tell us about MacIntyre, because I know that he's been instrumental in the return of virtue theory, right, to philosophy. And so talk about what's virtue theory, who is he, what role did he play?
Sure. Alistair MacIntyre is considered by many people to be one of the foremost philosophers of our time. He's a moral philosopher. He's British. He was born in 1929. He's still alive. He's still writing now. He came to this country in 1970, and during the 1970s, his thinking really underwent a shift. He began thinking about the moral questions that he'd been focusing on. What if he thought about them in light of the approach of Aristotle or of Thomas Aquinas and their emphasis on the virtues? And he thought, boy, that really changes the way he was thinking about those questions. And so he had been working on a book. He tore up the manuscript. He started over, and he said, let's reframe it. And so that new book was published in the early 1980s called After Virtue.
Well, and I think about the way that ethics classes are often taught, or even talked about, right? Ethical issues, which is that, we have some very difficult gray area kind of question that we focus on. What do you think about abortion, or what do you think about, ending life, and so forth, and then we all sort of just give our opinions on it. But we don't necessarily ask ourselves, well, whatever we think about those things, could we do the right thing if we knew what it was? If we knew what the right thing to do was? That's just kind of a separate question. Knowing what's good versus actually being good or being able to do the right thing.
Yeah, so the title of his book is funny. After Virtue means, on the one hand, we're living in this period after a time when people used to be concerned about virtue. Now we're concerned about winning arguments and arguing, as you say, about these cases, abortion, allocation of healthcare resources, war and peace, these kinds of issues. And one of the features of our time is this interminable debate that we have. But maybe if we reframe those issues to focus on questions of virtue, we can think about them in a different kind of a way.
That's a good point. We get a sense that there's no answers. And you always deal with this, as a philosophy professor myself, right? You get this sense from the students, well, there's the utilitarian view, there's the Kantian, who knows, right? It just seems like it's going to go on and on. But by focusing on the person, the character, how does the good person proceed, you have a totally different approach. It's kind of a sea change in ethics.
He points to several modern characters that he thinks really, he says they play a central role in the social drama of the contemporary age. The therapist and the manager. And he thinks what's crucial about these characters, he says, when an office executive goes to work, they put on this separate hat where they take the ends of the organization as given, And their task is to operate as a technician to organize the people in the firm to accomplish this given task. And he thinks
serving the stockholders, serving the stakeholders. We can argue about what it is, but they take it as given.
That's right.
Right.
And so part of his task in that book is to sort of unmask this character and to show that this character makes it impossible for either practitioners who are managers or people who interact with managers to frame questions in terms of virtue. And so one of the themes of the book, and part of what I'm doing in my book, is sort of drawing out the criticisms that he has of this character. I can say more about that.
Well, but just to stop you there for a moment, MacIntyre's not necessarily someone who we would consider friendly to free markets, is he?
Oh no,
I think he calls himself an old Marxist at one point.
Well, when he was a young man, maybe 17, 18, 19 years old, he was drawn to Marxism in the 1950s when the revelations came out about Stalin and Hungary and those sorts of things. He tried to repudiate some of those things. By the 1970s, he had become very disenchanted with features of Marxism, but he's had ongoing criticisms of global capitalism, to be sure. With that having been said, since the publication of After Virtue, there's been an ongoing debate in the business ethics literature of people trying to draw from his writing, and so I'm extending that conversation.
So the points that he's making in ethics aren't necessarily tied to his economic views. In other words, there's ways to work with them even if you don't agree with his criticisms. One
story that I think really captures a crucial insight of his is it's a thought experiment. It's a philosopher's thought experiment. He says, imagine this. Suppose you're given charge of a young child, 7, 8, 9 years old, maybe your nephew or something. Take care of this child for a while. And so you say to the young child, all right, what do you want to do to pass the time? Let's play chess. Do you want to play chess? And the child says, I don't like chess. I don't want to play chess. So, well, how do you know? Did you ever even play chess? No, I don't like chess. Well, what do you like? I like candy.
Yeah.
All right, so you say, I'll tell you what, I'll teach you the rules of chess, and we'll play a game of chess, and at the end of the game, I'll give you 50 cents. You can buy a piece of candy. And if you win, I'm going to play in such a way that it'll be possible for you to win. Mm-hmm. I'll give you $1. You can have 2 pieces of candy. So motivated, you agree to play. The child plays.
Enlightened self-interest.
There you go. And next week you come back, you play again. Each week you have your weekly chess game with your little nephew or something. And then one time in the middle of the chess game, there's an interruption. You get up, you're called away. You come back to the chessboard. You look at it. You think, wait, something doesn't look right here. The pieces. Didn't I have more pieces than that? Is that where they were? Whose turn is it anyway? And the child says, it's my turn. And the child moves and says, check. And you realize you're trapped, right? And you see what happened here, right?
Yes.
And so next week you play again, but now you're not going to get up. And and each week you come back now until one week you come back and the child says, well, let's play chess. And you say, well, I didn't bring any money. No 50 cents, no $1, no candy, we can't play. And the child says, no. I don't care about the money or the candy. I just want to play. Right? So there's been some change now. Now what the child has learned is that internal to the activity of playing chess, there's a practice here with some excellences that are discoverable in the activity of playing chess, and a special kind of analytic thinking, strategic imagination, a kind of competitive intensity, and to play in pursuit of those excellences is a different sort of experience. So now, were there an interruption, were you called away from the game, the child wouldn't be tempted to cheat, because in cheating, the child would also be cheating themselves out of the pursuit of those excellences. So what MacIntyre has to teach us is to focus on concrete social practices like chess playing. But there are a lot of social practices that we're all participants in musical activities, athletic activities, even professional activities. We call medicine, law, the practice of medicine, the practice of law, and so forth. And so part of his proposal is that the way we've come to understand management, we can't think of it as a social practice with its own standards of excellence internal to it, that it only prizes efficiency and effectiveness and not those standards of excellence that are internal to it. No, I think that's a criticism of a certain kind of manager, right? But the task of the book is to reconceive managerial activities, to come to think about whether there might be standards of excellence that are internal to planning, leading, organizing, monitoring, correcting, celebrating the activities that managers do, and to think about whether there are virtues that help advance excellence in those activities.
Okay, so when we come back from our break, I want you to kind of walk us through the argument of the book, because it sounds like it's a paradigm shift in the way that we think about managers, but one that we can support through kind of an empirical analysis of what they're actually doing, right? When we actually observe managers and we see the excellences that they practice. So I'm very interested in hearing about that. We'll be back in just a moment. Hi, I'm Rachel Duchamp. Welcome back to Free Exchange. In this latter segment of our discussion with Dr. Greg Beabout, we've also been joined by Dr. Howard Wall, the director of the Hammond Institute. So, Greg, when you joined us earlier in the spring, you've actually done a couple of talks here at Lindenwood. You came in on our Sibley Day, our day of thinking, we like to call it, and talked to us about business humanities, which is not a phrase we hear very often. Tell us about that.
The notion of business humanities came to me in the middle of the writing of the book, and I noticed this difference between the development in medical ethics compared to business ethics. Over the last 20 or 25 years, people in medical ethics, medical schools, almost all medical schools now require their students to take a course in medical ethics, but they also they've added an area called medical humanities, where future physicians and current physicians read literature, study history, engage in those activities that characterize the humanities to increase the kinds of skills and abilities that make us more humane and more divine. And in business, this is almost completely lacking. Now, partly it's the fault of those of us in the humanities who have often had very dismissive and negative views of people who work in the business sector. And so part of my interest is increasing conversation between those of us interested in the humanities and those of us in the business sector.
Now, Greg, just as an example of how it's been divorced, so the humanities and business and other dimensions of education, is I was doing a spell check when I was putting together information for the Institute, and your research, or part of your study, is on Kierkegaard. And the spell checker caught Kierkegaard. So first of all, Kierkegaard was not in the spell checker, and second of all, the alternative word it gave to me was irregardless. So there were so many problems with that whole series. I was disheartened.
That's great. And your book on Kierkegaard is called Freedom and Its Misuses. So even your work on Kierkegaard, who's an existentialist, and we might think of that as some separate, interest in philosophy, actually ties in quite well with your other interest in the use of freedom as an area for persons to express themselves, right?
And actually, I've got a chapter on Kierkegaard in this book, on the character of the manager, because MacIntyre treats Kierkegaard, but I think really misunderstands Kierkegaard. Well, he doesn't see that what Kierkegaard is trying to do is transform his reader's understanding of this character that he describes, the aesthete, of what it is to live a beautiful life. And he wants to not just say, don't live like this, but let's change our understanding of what it is to live a beautiful life. And I think MacIntyre hasn't done that for us with regard to the manager, at least not enough. He's said, all right, don't be this kind of manager. All right, clear enough, clear enough. But what would it be to be excellent at the activities of planning, organizing, leading, monitoring, correcting, celebrating, taking into account the very legitimate concerns of efficiency and effectiveness, but also looking at other sorts of concerns about justice and wisdom, about the common good. How can we bring all that together? And so that's part of my task here.
Yeah, that sort of dismissive attitude that you mentioned towards the businesses may be coming through there. You know, we know what we don't like, we're not sure what we like. The other talk that you gave here in the spring was for the political philosophy conference, Free Markets and Localism, and it was called Whose Capitalism, Which Freedom, which is a play off of a MacIntyre title, right?
One of his books, the book that he published right after Virtue, is called Whose Justice, Which Rationality? And so he's interested in the ways in which we use these central terms in multiple ways: justice, rationality. And so I'm trying to think about the same thing with regard to capitalism. What's our different understandings of capitalism and freedom?
Yeah, for instance, Howard and I were just talking about, you know, the notion of being pro-business or pro-markets, which is really two different things. And so when people say capitalist, they assume you mean something like wanting a lot of big corporations or something like that. But actually, that's not what the Hammond Institute is about.
No, capitalism is the way that businesses are organized and allowed to help the society as a whole, flourish, not just to enrich the capitalists. It's how society can benefit from the existence of capitalists.
And it may be that in a true free market, businesses would look different. They might be smaller, they might be more varied, we don't really know.
They'd be spending less money on lobbying.
Well, we know that, right?
One distinction that MacIntyre makes that I think is helpful and worth exploring, he draws a distinction between social practices, right? So I talked about chess, athletics, music, medicine, law, and institutions, right?
Okay.
So chess is a practice. Chess clubs are institutions. Now, the relation between the two is complicated. We need, in order for chess to flourish as a practice, we need institutions like chess clubs. St. Louis is now chess headquarters.
And Lindenwood has a chess team now, that's right.
And so that helps advance the practice of chess. And those institutions need leaders, managers who are charged with setting up tournaments, so on and so forth, those kinds of things. But the people in charge of those institutions are constantly prone to the temptation to prize too much power, prestige, money, and to neglect those standards of excellence that are internal to the core practices. And that's true whether it's a chess club, a baseball team. Now in professional athletics, we have all these examples of athletes who are using performance-enhancing drugs, cutting corners and so forth. And so there's a complicated relationship, for example, in baseball between the activity of baseball and the institutions that support it, like Major League Baseball and so forth. And so business leaders, it seems to me, need to be attentive to their role as leaders of an institution and the core practices that are involved in that institution. And part of their role is to develop and help nurture those core practices and the standards of excellence that are internal to those activities. At the same time, their activities are different. Their activities are planning and leading and organizing, and they need to be attentive to the standards of excellence internal to those activities. And so I propose that there's really two characters that we might look at and retrieve, these ancient characters. The steward, this character who's charged with caring for the property and well-being of someone else while they're away, right? In monarchical situations, right? If the king was too young, they would have a steward take care of them, and then the person of practical wisdom. The person of practical wisdom is almost always someone who has experience. They're good at deliberation, they're good at taking in information, seeing the complexity of a situation, looking at different perspectives, and then they're good at making judgments. They make the right sort of judgment at the right time, in the right way, for the right reason, with the right passion and dedication, and then they're good at execution. They carry it out. And so that person of practical wisdom, I think, is a character that we could retrieve and apply for this sort of new paradigm shift that we were discussing.
Well, so why do you think that, say, the institution kind of, I guess, takes its eye off the ball sometimes and takes its eye off the excellence? So if it's someone running a chess club, they start thinking, well, we can become famous or generate more revenue or get in the newspaper more often, something like that. Why is it? There must be some reason.
Well, there's lots of human reasons. I mean, human beings are prone to all kinds of temptations, right? Power is attractive, and then power corrupts, right? Money's attractive, money's good, except that we end up sometimes prizing money too much. The same is the case with prestige, right? Prestige is a good, and it's an important good, but it's not the only good, and sometimes we end up overemphasizing that, and that people that end up dealing with those things, it's an old story. It's common that we end up taking our eye off our ability to use wisdom to evaluate a range of competing goods.
Now, if I'm running a business and you're saying, oh, you're missing out on all of the excellence, and as well, I'm a businessman, I'm here to make money. What's the answer to that?
It's almost always more complicated than that. For one, many businesses at their origin, there was a combination of a spirit of entrepreneurship and the need for good managerial decision making. And so it's a very common challenge that business leaders have is how do you retain the energy and drive that came in the founding entrepreneurial vision that was part of the organization and do that in a responsible and measured way so that it's managed well as the organization continues. And so I think that's part of it is just looking at the balance of the multiple hats that any business leader must wear.
Well, and it gets to differences in kind of business structure. A public corporation, which has to answer to shareholders, the manager and the shareholder are separate, and you have to supposedly adopt what the shareholders want, and the shareholders, even of a baseball team, might not care about the excellence of baseball, but they want the profit, whereas a privately owned baseball team, family-run team might have different objectives. So
but there's
how do you...
Is a kind of moral myopia an issue that comes in here, right? Short-term versus long-term thinking. I just saw the film 42 about Jackie Robinson. And of course that manager took an incredible amount of risks and went through a lot in order to get this black player. But what a great move, in the long run, right? Is that a part of your argument?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's also the case, it seems to me, as Howard mentions, there's a lot of business models, right? And so the model of publicly traded companies where shareholder value is an important way of raising capital. That's one model. It doesn't have to be the only model. A lot of the organizations that we have in contemporary society, hospitals, educational institutions, have very different models, and but sometimes they only look to the publicly traded company as the only possible model. The other thing is there are many very successful companies. You look at Trader Joe's and Aldi's and so forth. They're right there. They have a different business model, and then I do my banking through a credit union, right? A credit union has a very different business model, and so that there are ways that we can look at different models where there's still managerial accountability, but accountability can be structured in different ways in different kinds of business organizations.
Right, and we see that each one has its part to play. In society overall, that certain things you go to a credit union for because that's what works, right? And so it's subtle. Well, thank you so much for coming today to talk to us about your new book, The Character of the Manager: From Office Executive to Wise Steward. And if you want to learn more about Dr. Beabout's work or the work of the Liberty and Ethics Center, check us out at www.lindenwood.edu/Hammond Institute. Thanks for being with us today, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.